There are moments in sport that cannot be explained by statistics. Cannot be captured by analytics. Cannot be reduced to launch angles or spin rates or win probability percentages that scroll across the bottom of a broadcast screen. There are moments that belong to something older than data. Something more human than strategy. Something that lives in the space between a coach's voice and a player's chest, where words stop being words and become something that moves through a person like electricity. Game 3. Final game. Series on the line. The Dodgers were flat. The energy was wrong. The body language in the dugout carried the specific heaviness of a team that had momentum and could feel it slipping, not dramatically, not catastrophically, but quietly and dangerously, the way a tide pulls back before something larger arrives. And then Coach Smith spoke. Not calmly. Not with the measured, analytical tone of a pre-game tactical briefing. Not with the careful language of a man managing optics and press conference soundbites. He roared. Believe in the gold logo patch. 4 words, or something close to them, delivered with an emotional intensity that stopped every conversation in that dugout. That cut through the pre-game noise and the nervous energy and the weight of a must-win situation and landed directly in the place where competitive fire either lives or doesn't. Ohtani heard it. And what happened next is what this story is actually about. To fully appreciate what Coach Smith's words unlocked, you have to understand exactly what the Dodgers were carrying into the final game. Game 1 had gone to the Cardinals, a disciplined, composed performance from a team that the national media had already written off. That loss had landed heavily. Not because it was unexpected by the people paying closest attention, but because of what it revealed about the Dodgers' late-inning composure under maximum pressure. Game 2 had belonged to the Dodgers, Ohtani had been devastating, the bullpen had held, and the momentum had shifted back to Los Angeles with the kind of force that made a series victory feel almost inevitable. Almost. Because here is the truth about momentum in a short series. It is the most fragile thing in professional sport. It exists completely and then it evaporates, sometimes between innings, sometimes between games, sometimes in the 48 hours between a victory and the next first pitch when a team has too much time to think and not enough time to simply compete. The Dodgers had time to think. And thinking, without the anchor of a disciplined routine and a clear emotional direction, had done its damage. By the time the final game arrived, the Dodgers were not broken. But they were not right either. The sharpness of Game 2 had softened slightly. The collective certainty that had defined their best baseball was operating at 90% instead of 100, and at this level, against a Cardinals team desperate and dangerous in equal measure, 90% is not enough. Coach Smith saw it. And he chose to do something about it in the most direct way available to him. Before we go further, it is worth pausing on the specific words Coach Smith chose. Because they were not random. The gold logo patch on a Dodgers uniform is not decoration. It is not a design choice made by a marketing department. For the players who wear it, particularly the players who have competed long enough to understand what it represents, it carries a specific weight. It represents a standard. A history. A collection of moments and decisions and sacrifices made by players who came before, who wore the same logo, who understood that putting on that uniform was not a privilege to be taken for granted but a responsibility to be honored every single time they stepped onto a baseball field. When Coach Smith told his players to believe in the gold logo patch, he was not giving a pep talk. He was reminding them of something they already knew but had temporarily lost access to under the pressure of a must-win situation. He was telling them, loudly, emotionally, with every ounce of conviction available to him, that the standard already existed. That it had been built before them and would exist after them. That their only job, in this moment, in this game, was to access it. Ohtani understood this immediately. Not because the words were new to him. But because they arrived at exactly the moment his internal system needed an external confirmation of what he had already been telling himself. Sometimes the most powerful thing a coach can do is say out loud what a player has been quietly saying to himself, and say it with enough conviction to make it feel true in the bones rather than just the mind. Coach Smith did exactly that. The Cardinals came out for the final game with the energy of a team that understood exactly what was available to them. Win this game. Take this series. Walk out of Dodger Stadium with a result that nobody predicted and that nobody who witnessed it will forget. Their starting pitcher was sharp from the first pitch. Aggressive. Attacking the zone with a conviction that reflected exactly the preparation and belief that had defined the Cardinals' approach throughout the series. For 2 innings, the Dodgers answered with silence. Not productive silence. Not the patient, information-gathering quiet of a lineup that is building toward something. The wrong kind of silence. Passive at-bats. Pitches taken that should have been attacked. A collective hesitation that suggested the weight of the moment was landing heavier than the preparation could fully absorb. And then the 3rd inning arrived. And Ohtani walked to the plate carrying something different. It is difficult to describe the change in a player's presence when something internal has shifted, when a conversation or a moment or a single sentence has reconnected them to the version of themselves that operates without doubt or hesitation. It is not visible in the statistics. It is barely visible to the television cameras. But the players on the field feel it immediately. The Cardinals pitcher felt it. Ohtani's first at-bat of meaningful consequence in the final game was not a home run. It was not a statistic that will headline the box score recap. It was a walk, but a walk taken with such complete command of the strike zone, such utter refusal to offer at anything that was not precisely what he wanted, that it communicated something to everyone watching. Ohtani was present. Fully, completely, dangerously present. The Cardinals pitcher threw 6 pitches in that at-bat. Ohtani fouled off 3 of them, not defensively, not as survival swings, but as controlled redirections of pitches that were close enough to attack but not quite in the location he had decided to accept. He walked on pitch 6. And the Dodgers dugout, which had been quiet and heavy 30 minutes earlier, began to breathe differently. The 5th inning of the final game is where everything changed. The Cardinals were clinging to a 1-run lead, the product of disciplined, manufactured baseball that required no extra base hits and reflected exactly the kind of intelligent, situational offense their coaching staff had built throughout the season. It was a good lead. A lead built on good baseball. It lasted approximately 4 minutes into the 5th inning. Ohtani came to the plate with 2 runners on base and the specific stillness that, if you have watched him long enough, you begin to recognize as the most dangerous version of him. Not the animated, crowd-feeding version. Not the player acknowledging the moment. The quiet version. The version that has already decided. The Cardinals pitcher made his choice, a breaking ball, low and away, designed to generate a weak ground ball and preserve the lead with 1 pitch. Ohtani did not generate a weak ground ball. What he generated instead traveled over the left field wall with a violence and a certainty that felt less like a baseball being hit and more like a verdict being delivered. 3 runs scored. Dodger Stadium did not gradually build to a reaction. It exploded, immediately, completely, the kind of crowd noise that physically changes the atmosphere inside a baseball stadium and makes the visiting dugout feel very far from home. The Cardinals pitcher stood on the mound. He had made a reasonable choice. He had executed it adequately. And it had not mattered at all, because the man standing in the batter's box had been operating at a level of preparation and readiness that made reasonable choices and adequate execution insufficient. That is what Coach Smith's roar had unlocked. Not talent, Ohtani's talent was never the question. But the full, unfiltered, completely present access to everything he had prepared, everything he had built, everything the gold logo patch on his chest represented. The Cardinals did not recover. What followed Ohtani's 5th inning eruption was the methodical, almost inevitable completion of what he had started. The Dodgers bullpen, sharp, focused, operating with the clarity that comes from competing behind a lead that feels earned rather than fragile, shut the Cardinals down inning after inning with the kind of collective composure that reflects an entire organization's standard of preparation. The Cardinals competed. Their character, throughout this series, has never been in question. They pushed. They put runners on base. They forced the Dodgers' defense to make plays under pressure, and the Dodgers made them. Every single one. By the ninth inning, the outcome had been decided not by a single moment but by the accumulated weight of an entire team operating at its standard, the standard that Coach Smith had reminded them of, loudly and emotionally, before first pitch. Final game. Final out. Dodgers. Series over. Strip everything away from the final game, the statistics, the highlights, the broadcast analysis, and what remains is something remarkably simple. A coach saw his team losing access to their best version of themselves. He chose the most direct path back to it. He roared 4 words that carried the weight of an entire organization's history and identity. And Ohtani, who needed not motivation but reconnection, heard those words and delivered everything that the moment required. This is what separates great teams from talented collections of players. Talent gets you to the final game. Belief in what the logo on your chest represents, genuinely, completely, under maximum pressure, is what wins it. Coach Smith knew that. Ohtani proved it. And the Cardinals, a genuinely dangerous, genuinely prepared, genuinely competitive team, paid the full price for facing a Dodgers group that remembered, just in time, exactly who they were supposed to be.